I'm reading chapter 2 of this book. Underwater Adventures. The first thing the boys noticed after walking through the portal was blinding sunshine. After their eyes adjusted to the light, they saw that they had stepped onto the deck of a small boat that appeared to be in an ocean with no shores in sight. The dazzling light was reflecting off of its small, gentle waves. A man who looked very much like Josh, except with blonde hair and beard, stood nearby, looking at them like he too had been waiting for them. "Hey, what's up?" he greeted them. "We really don't know what's up," Tanner replied. "Perhaps you could let us in on what's up." The man chuckled. "The name is Mike," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you," the boys said, each shaking his hand. "Your mission, should you choose to accept it," Mike continued, "is to rescue these people from their distress." Mike stepped over to the edge of the boat, motioning them to follow and look. As the boys followed curiously, they now noticed that the water was a beautiful light greenish-blue color, but totally clear. In the boat's shadow, they could see into the water, which was surprisingly shallow, given the fact that there was no land in sight, all the way to the ocean floor, only about 10 feet down. Peering down to see what Mike was pointing to, they saw that what appeared to be a small and colorful underwater village full of tiny people who were fleeing in the chaos of terror in every direction and disappearing into small but colorful holes in the rocks. Hot on their heels were several sharks, which were enormous to the tiny people, but looked to the boys like baby sharks, like the kind they had reached in to touch in the little pool at the butterfly house. As the sharks chased the people, they crashed through the little houses and buildings, leaving a wake of destruction wherever they went. "So," said Tanner, "just how are we supposed to help them?" Mike smiled. "I thought you might ask that," he replied. Reaching into a nearby bucket of water, he pulled out a handful of small, cylindrical but hollow shells. These may look like glass, but they are actually very strong and unbreakable. There is a substance that exists in certain holes in the ocean floor, somewhat like a well would hold water in your world, with which you can glue these together in a strong bond to form a wall around the village, which will reach all the way up above the surface of the water. This will keep the sharks out of the living areas of the people. The people know where to find these building materials. You will have to become like them and win their cooperation in order to fulfill your mission. All the boys looked at each other with an expression of, "What the heck, let's try it," on their faces. "Oh, and I want you to meet someone who will go with you to help you whenever you run into troubles," Mike continued. "He's kind of ethereal, so you may have to really look for him, but he is here. His name is Parakletos, but you can call him Perry for short. Do you see him?" "I don't need any help," Gus muttered under his breath, insulted. But the boys squinted in the direction of Mike's indication. After a moment, they realized that they were seeing the form of a person, but he looked rather like the sunlight reflecting off the water. Somehow they could tell that he was looking at them, so they said, "Hi, nice to meet you." "Hey, same," Perry answered. His voice sounded like waves breaking on the shore. "Lastly," said Mike, "when you are ready, I will set this hoop on the water, and when you all jump through it, you will become like the little people that you're going to help." The boys looked dubiously at the hoop in Mike's hand. "If you say so," Quinn muttered. There was only room for one person at a time to jump through the hoop. Perry volunteered to go first, but since they could barely see him, it was difficult to spot him at first after he jumped through the hoop. Mike pointed him out. He was a little easier to see underwater once they knew where to look, but he had shrunk to the size of the little water people. "Okay," Ryan said. "Who's next?" "I will," said Tanner. Taking a deep breath, he jumped. The other boys watched in a bit of shock as their friend suddenly was only 3 inches tall and looked rather different. His skin was now blue with brown spots on it and reminded him of a newt. As Tanner swam, he noticed that his hands and feet had webbed retractable claws that involuntarily came out and retracted according to when in his swimming motions he needed webbed hands and feet or not. He was a bit freaked out, to say the least, but when he saw Perry swimming nearby, he felt a little better. Also, he found that he was not holding his breath, but he could breathe the water just fine. Odd, he thought, feeling around for gills, which he found on the sides of his neck. Creepy was his next thought. "This is so weird," Ryan said. Gus went next, and the same thing happened to him, followed by Ryan and then Quinn. Next thing the boys knew, a couple of enormous hungry-looking sharks were rapidly swimming in their direction, having spotted them as new prey since the sea dwellers had escaped them this time. "Oh crap, now what?" Tanner said. Since they were in an unfamiliar place and knew next to nothing about how to survive here, he looked at Perry, hoping for some kind of a plan. "Dive! Dive!" Perry shouted to the boys. After they all swam straight down as fast as they could for a few seconds, Perry shouted again, "Now swim under them." The sharks had closed the distance between them considerably, so they quickly turned and ducked under them. Once they were all safely in the sharks' shadows, Perry explained that the sharks' eyes were set in their heads in such a way that they could see above and ahead of them, but they really couldn't see anything directly under them. While the sharks were slowing down to change directions and get turned around to pursue them, Perry found one of the colorful holes, which were now the size of a small cave to them, for them all to slip into. They stood there catching their breaths and kind of laughing at how they had managed to give the sharks the slip. Suddenly, a musical female voice came from the dim, deeper parts of the small cave. "Hi, guys." The owner of the voice stepped out of the shadows into the blue light that streamed into the part of the cave where the boys stood. Although she had the brown and blue skin and newt-like markings that they all now had, her form and facial features were so beautiful that the boys were momentarily speechless. Her long, dark brown hair flowed enchantingly around her shapely form. "I'm Ariana, and who might you dashing, handsome newcomers be?" "Be careful," Perry whispered to the boys. "She works for Lukey." Without taking their eyes off the entrancing female sea dweller, the four boys thought, "Who the heck is Lukey?" Perry read their thoughts and responded, "Just a wily deceiver who wants to kill you." Ariana came nearer to the boys and looked at them for an answer to her question. "I'm Gus," Gus responded, quite taken by her, in spite of Perry's warning. "Hi, Gus," Ariana said in her smooth, silky way, touching his arm. "You must be very brave to come here in the midst of such a crisis." "Yeah," Gus kind of laughed, not knowing what to say, but feeling all reservations about her melting away in the onslaught of her feminine charms. "So, what brings you four brave men here to our village today?" Ariana questioned further, still mostly addressing Gus. "We are here to build a wall around your village to keep the sharks out," Gus replied, "but we don't know where to find the materials. We're supposed to use cylindrical shells and something that you have in holes on the floor, ocean floor, that will make them stick together really well." "Oh, such a noble mission," Ariana remarked, smiling. "I can help you find these materials if you like." "I like," Gus responded, still gazing at her, completely entranced. Before anyone else could say anything, Ariana took Gus by the hand and looked at the others like, "Are you coming or not?" "I'm sure the sharks are long gone by now," she said. Then she swam out of the cave, taking Gus with her. The other boys looked at Perry. He shook his head. "Human males are so easy to lead astray," he said. "It's not even fair." "Should we follow them?" the boys asked. "Not now," Perry said. "Now we find someone who will really lead us to the materials we need." Emerging from the cave, the three boys and Perry swam toward the ruins of the village. By now the sea dwellers were milling about everywhere, surveying the damage that the sharks had done to their dwellings. The boys looked around too. The village looked like a town in our world looks after a tornado. They stopped by one dwelling where a man and his wife stood by looking on, trying to plan what to do. Nearby stood their four lovely daughters, looking rather somber. "Hey, sorry about your house," Tanner said to the girls in an attempt to make conversation. The girls looked at the newcomers in surprise. Then one of the girls replied, "Yeah, it's so overwhelming to think of rebuilding when this just keeps happening." "I'm Aaliyah. Who are you guys and what brings you here?" "I'm Tanner and this is Ryan and Quinn," Tanner replied, indicating the others with his hand. "We've come to try to build a tall wall around your village to keep the sharks out for good." Aaliyah looked intrigued. Then she introduced her sisters as well. "This is Shemaiah, Mattiah, and Ishaya." The girls smiled and nodded to the newcomer boys. The boys thought that they were just as pretty as Ariana, but in a more open, cleaner, less perilous way. Their long flowing hair was a fascinating golden reddish color, and their beautiful eyes drew the boys in with some mysterious quality that they could not name. "What will you build the wall with?" Shemaiah asked. "We have to find these cylindrical hollow shells and a substance that is found in the holes in the ocean floor that will hold them together in a solid bond," Quinn replied. "Do you know where we could find these things?" The shells that the forest slugs shed as they grow? Mattia asked as she looked at her sisters. And sludge? I think that might actually work amazingly, Ishaya commented. It's certainly worth a try. Why have we never thought of such a thing? So will you lead us to where we can find these things? Ryan asked. The girls looked at each other and pulled away from the boys to consult with each other. Lukey's helpers have been seen recently in these parts, Shemaiah said, in a low voice to her sisters. How do we know these guys aren't really working for him? Let's ask Mom, Aaliyah suggested. She has a good sense for these things. Ishaya went to ask their mom what she thought. Their mom looked over at the boys. I see Perry is with them, she responded. That's good enough for me. Ishaya came back to the huddle with her sisters. Mom says that Perry's with them, so there you go. It must be nice to be able to see that sort of thing, Mattia said. I hope I get to that point someday. The girls came back to talk to the boys. Yes, we will be honored to go with you and help you with this project, Aaliyah announced for her sisters. Meanwhile, Gus and Ariana swam through the forests of seaweed, Ariana talking and giggling and flirting all the way until they came to the plains of the sludge pits. Wide open ocean floor stretched ahead as far as the eye could see, with not a rock or piece of seaweed around, dotted only by large sludge pits here and there. Gus was so lost under Ariana's spell that he hadn't even thought about how they would get any materials back to the village. As they came near to a sludge pit, Gus started to feel the warmth coming up from it, and began to see the way it bubbled and oozed up from beneath the sea floor. Soon they stood on the very edge of the pit. Ariana looked over her shoulder to see a couple of sharks that Gus had been too absorbed to notice. They had been stealthily following the pair since they had come out of the seaweed forest, swimming very low to the sea floor where their colors blended in with the colors of the sand and pebbles that covered the plains area. As they drew near, Ariana smiled slyly, and putting her foot in front of Gus's feet, she pushed him with her hand so that he tripped and fell first into the gooey black sludge. Oops, she said, how clumsy of me. Then she giggled and slipped away under the shadows of the approaching sharks, swimming away as soon as she was sure their attention was absorbed with Gus's panicky efforts to escape the gooey grip of the sludge pit. Accompanied by their new sea-dweller friends, Tanner, Quinn, and Ryan each dragged huge sled-type wagons made of enormous oyster shells drawn by seaweed ropes into the seaweed forest to gather materials for the wall. Wandering through the forest, they hunted for the shells, spotting them here and there. Soon 3 of the sleds were piled high with shells. These they left at the edge of the forest as they went onto the plains to gather sludge into the other 4 sleds. However, as they swam out of the seaweed forest, they spotted the sharks and withdrew quickly to watch from safety. What are they doing? Ryan asked, puzzled by the way the sharks hovered over a sludge pit not far away. There's something or someone stuck in that sludge pit, Mattia responded, concern creeping into her voice. It's Gus, Perry said to the boys. Oh my God, Tanner said, he's shark lunch for sure. No, Ryan shouted, we have to do something. Gathering that the person in trouble was a friend of the boys, the girls instantly and simultaneously each grabbed up a rock and used it to break off a piece of nearby coral for each of them. The way the coral broke made one end good for grabbing and the other end sharp and jagged. They grabbed the pieces of coral in one hand and a shell around their other arm like a shield and took off to battle the sharks. The boys quickly grabbed rocks and did the same, grabbing the coral and shells as the girls had, following hot on the girls' heels. It hadn't taken Gus long to realize that he was hopelessly stuck. The more he struggled, the more stuck he became. The realization that he was about to be eaten by sharks took over his mind, and his life flashed before his eyes as he felt their teeth break his skin and looked into their enormous mouths. Suddenly he heard the roar of battle cries, both male and female voices. The sharks were so startled that they opened their mouths again and turned to look around just in time to feel the pain of being repeatedly stabbed by 7 coral spears. They roared in pain and turned to attack their attackers. Tanner quickly glanced at Aaliyah's face and saw the terror in her eyes as she tried to prepare for the onslaught. Turning his attention to the charging shark, he jabbed his spear into the shark's eye with all of his might as it was coming down on Aaliyah with its enormous teeth. Aaliyah quickly raised her shield arm, and a couple of the shark's teeth broke on it as the shark came down with such force that Aaliyah crumpled under it. Blood clouded the water around the shark's eye so that Tanner could hardly see what was happening to Aaliyah. On the other side of the shark, Mattia threw her shield into the shark's mouth as it went mad with pain and anger, chomping blindly, as Aaliyah lay pinned underneath it. With Mattia's other hand, she stabbed the shark in the other eye. Then she and Tanner each grabbed Aaliyah's arm and pulled her away from the shark as it thrashed blindly around in the water, clouded in its own blood. I'm going to have to finish this next time because this is 15 minutes already.